The International Geographical Union is honored and overjoyed to present its Planet and Humanity Award to Mr. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela Madiba. As a leading humanist and statesman in championing human rights and freedom for the oppressed, Mr. Mandela's immense and selfless contribution to the welfare of humanity is acknowledged globally. His honors are many, including the Nobel Peace Prize. His curriculum vitae provides many lessons to scientists and politicians about our responsibility to the stewardship of society and the natural environments of our planet Earth. Only a few of his political and humanitarian achievements can be highlighted here. Your willingness to undergo suffering for the alleviation of human oppression. Your visionary and resilient engagement in socio-political activities that eventually led to the democratization of South Africa. Your commitment to the alleviation of poverty, to the upliftment of human dignity, and your unwavering belief in youth as the cornerstone of nation building. Mr. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela Madiba, your profound sense of justice, humility and warmth, and your sterling qualities of leadership indeed render you an ideal and deserving recipient of the IGU Planet and Humanity Medal for 2002. On behalf of the international community of geographers, I personally thank you for the inspiration, the courage, and the challenge which you continue to offer us. Saya Bonga.
The President of the International Geographical Union, esteemed members of the Union, our international visitors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, my grandchildren, including Dr. Ben Govaner, the Minister of Arts, Science, Culture, Science and Technology, and Michael Secretary. They keep on reminding me that I have now lost power and influence. I should remain with my grandchildren. I hope they will revise their opinion after this occasion, because a man who has lost power and influence cannot be honored by such an organization. But it is with a special sense of humility that we stand here to receive the Planet and Humanity Award. We are aware of how much correspondence and interventions it took to finally secure our presence here this afternoon. We need to indicate that the efforts it entailed to finally conclude the discussions about our participation had nothing to do with an unwillingness to accept this prestigious award or an attitude of playing hard to get, as the colloquial saying goes. We ourselves, as well as our office, long ago indicated to our Minister of Arts, Culture, Science and Technology that we would be extremely honored to receive the award. The vagaries of leaving official office, and having to establish home as an unemployed pensioner contributed to the uncertainty of not knowing where and in what condition one would be when the event comes around at last. Employed people and those in office can never imagine how chaotically unscheduled the lives are of those who find themselves in the idleness of retirement and pension. We are very happy that out of that chaos, our office could contrive to have us here at this most prestigious event and occasion. I am a simple boy, country boy, and I remain astounded and overawed by the awards and honors that people, for some incomprehensible reason, decide to bestow on us. A colleague of mine often asks me how it is that I remember so distinctly people I have met, dates on which events had occurred, and the details of occurrences. My consistent and truthful reply to him is the following. I am a simple country boy, unacquainted with all of these marvelous and strange things of the world. Every time I encounter people, things and events, they remain indelible stuck on my overawed mind. I left the country in April 1941, and many people may wonder why I call myself still a country boy. But although I left the country in 1941, the country has not left me. This evening will be such an occasion that I will never be able to forget. And it is, furthermore, an occasion that takes me back to concrete memories of and present-day knowledge about my origins as a country boy. When I got to the place and area of my birth, so often as I do, the changed geography of the place strikes me with a force that I cannot escape. And that geography is not one of mere landscape and topography. It is the geography of the people. Where once there were trees and even forests, we now see barrenness. I can no longer walk those distances, but until a few years ago, I would traverse the miles of land I knew as a child and young man. And one was saddened at the poverty of the people. Poverty lived out in the geography of the place. It is the geography of women and young people walking miles and miles to find the paltriest pieces of wood for fire to cook, a miserable meal, and to keep a shelter warm. The trees and forests were destroyed exactly because our people were so dependent upon them as sources of energy. And in turn, people are today cold and in want of energy for cooking, cleaning, and basic comfort because the trees and forests are destroyed. I walked and I saw in the land of my youth women walking, but walking in poverty and destitution. The streams of my youth that were places of beauty and inspiration were now clogged up and dirty. I saw the descendants of the mothers of our people bowing down to secure with their bare hands the cleanness of the dirty and dangerous water in those streams and pools. How would they get that water clean enough to use it for household purposes? I often ask them. They would boil it, they replied, if only they had wood or other sources of energy to do so. I was taking a walk a few years ago in my country village, and I came across a stream which was polluted and where the water was moving very slowly. And then I found 3 women fetching water. And I asked them, what are you going to do with this water? They said, we are going to use it for domestic purposes. We are going to cook with it, drink it, clean ourselves. I said that the water has tadpoles moving around. It has algae, this green stuff that covers stagnant water. And I said, on top there, you see people washing their bodies and their clothes. That water comes here. They say, that is our life. And then I asked this question, what do you do with this water before you use it? They say, we do nothing. We use it as it is. And then I asked a foolish question. I was born in that area, and I'm supposed to know the conditions. But for me, 27 years of prison life was sufficient to make me forget about the living conditions of my people. I then asked the question, don't you boil it before you use it? They all exclaimed simultaneously. Boil it with what? Look up, right up to the horizon. There is not a single tree. We have no electricity. With what must we boil it? We use cow dung, and that thing gives more smoke than heat. I felt humiliated because I should never have asked such a question, but I did. The alternative seemed clear. Use what they have and suffer the consequences. And the consequences were and remain cholera and other environmentally induced diseases. On the 9th of May, I was in New York, and I met one of the most powerful businessmen in the world, who has supported us in the past and built a school and a clinic. And when I formed the foundation, he invited me and my wife to his place in the United States of America. He then gave my wife $5 million and gave me $10 million. And his partner gave my wife $7.5 million, gave me $7.5 million too. Now, I said to him, I want you to build 45 schools in the countryside in South Africa. because there are vast areas in the countryside where there is no school, where there is no clinic. He says, no, I concentrate on health. I propose building so many clinics in our country. And we had an argument. I say, no, clinics are all right. But in the countryside, the situation, the thinking of the people is that the Sangomas are more reliable than clinics, modern clinics. We therefore want an educated core of people who are going to campaign in the countryside to say these clinics are much better than Sangomas. So that's why I want you to build a 45 schools. We couldn't resolve the argument. He says, no, I am prepared to respond, but only in the field of health. Well, I said, let me go back and go to consult. I came back home and I consulted the Minister of Education, Professor Carter Asma. He overruled the both of them. And he says, no, there are many schools throughout this country without water, without sewerage, where the school children have to go to the veld to relieve themselves. They have nothing to clean themselves, so they use grass. And then their fingers are soiled. With soiled hands, without washing, because there's no water, they go and handle food, bread, sandwiches, hard mealy pop, meat, fruits, and in that way cholera spreads. And then Professor Asmal said, what we want is the installation of water in all the schools, and it's going to cost a lot of money. Well, I have written to the businessman to say this is what the man who knows in this field thinks we should do. No schools, no new schools, no new clinics, but water for the schools that are there. Because that will go a long way in preventing cholera. These conditions I have seen repeated all over our country, our continent, and the developing world. We accept the honor you bestow upon us today, not as an honor in the usual sense of that word. We accept it as an acknowledgement of our common lack of honor as humanity for the manner in which we are destroying our mother planet and the chances for our children to have a sustainable future on Earth. Your award is, however, also a source of encouragement to take up and continue the struggle for a world in which we can live in dignity, not only amongst ourselves as human beings, but also as human beings in relationship with our natural environment. South Africa will soon be hosting the all-important World Summit for Sustainable Development. That your union gathered here now is part of the challenge to our country, its leaders and its people to be seen to be in the vanguard of the modern day struggle to render our environment a livable and sustainable one for our children. I try to live by the simple precept of making the world one in which there is a better life for all, particularly the poor, marginalized, and vulnerable. A devastated geography makes for a devastated people. It renders people vulnerable, and the traditionally vulnerable, women, children, the aged, and disabled, will always be bearing the brunt of that suffering. Let us stand together to make of our world a sustainable source for our future as humanity on this planet. I thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Unfortunately, I have to rush back. Because I'm missing the president of the room and the deputy president of our country because there's trouble. Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Well, I've just apologized because I have to leave. I have to meet the president of Burundi as well as the deputy president who is supposed to have been here. But he came back at 1 a.m. this morning from Malaysia. And I think that it was difficult for him to wake up to be here with me today. Thank you very much.
Dr. Mandela, Madiba, we have indeed been honored by your presence, and we thank you for addressing us in true geographical spirit. We will remember your address, we will record it, and on behalf of the South African International Geographical Union National Committee and all the entire South African geography community, we thank you for being with us. We wish you a safe journey home. Hamagashli, au revoir, and God bless. Professor Anne Buttimer, I now invite you to address this gathering of geographers and invited guests in your capacity as President of the International Geographical Union. Professor Anne Buttimer.
Thank you very much, Joan. It's a privilege and a delight to be here. I have been invited to speak about Alexander von Humboldt as an opening kind of message to this conference. The theme, Renaissance, is indeed an appropriate one. It invites remembrance, it invites renewal, a look at the past and a view toward the future. I think it's appropriate at the beginning of this millennium, where humanity as a whole is being invited to develop wiser ways of dwelling on the earth. And as Mr. Mandela has just said, this is one of the biggest challenges of this coming century. This cri du cœur is coming from many sources to change our ways toward more sustainable ones, is in many ways a plea for a renaissance of geography. Because that indeed was the message of our naissance, at least our more recent naissance, the turn of the 19th century. At that time, geography introduced three major challenges to conventional ways of knowing. First, it said, humanity should be considered as a terrestrial species, i.e., as somebody who inhabits Earth. Secondly, it suggested that the knowledge of the Earth could be greatly enhanced by regarding it as an abode for humankind, or at least thoroughly transformed by human habitat. And the third major message was that scientific travel, or getting out of the lab and the classroom and looking at places and meeting people, was an essential part of liberal education, an antidote to racism and biased images of self and the other. Now, if there's one person whose life and work embodies these three major messages, the three messages that are coming to us again today, it is Alexander von Humboldt. And it's some glimpses on his life and work that I wish to do today. It is, I think, a message which calls for a remembering of the limbs of the geographic effort, however impossible a dream that might be. Alexander von Humboldt has recently been crowned as the origin of a thing called Humboldtian science, a picture of which I have here in front of me. It was an effort to look at global patterns of health and disease, of flora and fauna, of livelihoods and potential, and it, through the use of clever graphics, placed phenomena in their geographical context. I picked this particular little window off one of the maps of health and disease because it claimed that at least 180 years ago, South Africa was one of the healthiest places on the surface of the earth. A challenge for Humboldtian science among you today. Moving quickly, I think it's with the mouse, yes? Technician? I thought it was with the... Is this view? It's on view mode. Sorry. Alexander von Humboldt, born in 1769, fairly wealthy parents in Berlin. Je m'excuse, je ne parle pas le français parce que j'ai compté sur 20 minutes seulement. Mais il y aura des projections en français, des citations, des références d'Alexander von Humboldt. Okay, there will be French versions of some of the citations. Alexander von Humboldt, his parents were fairly well-to-do. Mother of Huguenot French background, his father an army person. Father died when Alexander was 8 years old, but the mother, who was fairly well-to-do, made sure that he was privately tutored with the very best that was available at the day. Placing Alexander von Humboldt in the context of this wonderful century, spanning the mid-18th to the mid-19th, you understand the gigantic challenge he faced practically and intellectually. It was a century when major new movements occurred in science and engineering, mathematics, in politics, in literature and philosophy. And as far as the study of nature goes, there were polar tensions between, on the one hand, what we call encyclopédisme, that is, the French Enlightenment, which saw potential explanations of nature through mechanical laws and the potential for a better society based on such reasoning. This was anathema to the so-called nature philosophers, who felt that nature was forever inscrutable, mysterious, and it was an insult to impose a scientific grid on it. I think Alexander von Humboldt, through his interactions with Goethe and others, managed to transcend this great divide which is still with us between the sciences and the humanities. The 18th century was a century of the salon, the discussion among the savants, rather than a university one yet. And here you have Alexander and his brother, together with Hegel and Ritter, discussing all kinds of philosophical issues. He studied geology and botany in Göttingen, and it was there, thanks to his brother Wilhelm, that he met Foster, the person who had been on the circumnavigation of the world with Cook. Foster took him with him on a voyage on the Rhine, where he observed the basalt and other geological formations. They visited England and returned to Paris on the 14th of July, 1790. Just imagine a 21-year-old reaching Paris on the year of just after the Revolution. The Revolution was still having its passion and its purity. He never lost his faith in the French revolutionary ideas. He returned to Germany, worked as a supervisor of mines. There he observed the behavior of animals and plants in underground conditions. And also he visited now and then Jena, where you had these philosophers holding forth on all kinds of philosophical issues. This is Goethe, who himself was very interested in science. He in fact had studied botany and physics. Goethe said that it was Alexander von Humboldt that awakened his interest in science from its slumber. And he wrote to Schiller saying, "I can't tell you how much I have learned from my conversation with Humboldt." Schiller, however, holding forth here, had very little time for Humboldt. He said he has a small-minded, restless vanity in his whole work. He impresses many people, and he wins most times in comparison with his brother because he has a owl, and usually makes an impression. Humboldt returned to Paris, where where his brother had an apartment. He met there Bonpland, Aimé Bonpland, a physician who traveled with him to the Americas. And it was from these journeys in America over 200 years ago that most of the data was gathered underlying his famous cosmic work. He said of this situation, having to sleep for 4 months in forests surrounded by crocodiles, anacondas, jaguars who attacked the canoes, despite all these troubles, he said, "My health and my mood have clearly improved since I left Spain. The tropical world is my element. I have never been so consistently healthy as during these last 2 years." But he said the purpose of his voyage wasn't just to experience the tropics. It was to study. He described the agenda. "I shall collect plants and fossils and make astronomical observations with the best of instruments. Yet this is not the main purpose of my journey. I shall endeavor to discover how nature's forces act upon one another and in what manner the geographic environment exerts its influence on animals and plants. In short, I must find out about the harmony in nature." So that was the whole purpose of his great monumental work, Cosmos, which took him nearly 30 years after returning from the tropics. He did, I don't have time to go through all his voyages, but it's tremendous journeys equipped with the most modern of instruments. And he made many discoveries on oceanic currents, on volcanic activity, on resources, and so on. But his instruments were the most modern available in the day. The characteristic of his work was that he tried to place individual observations into larger patterns, currents, and so on. But all the time he thought of how to explain these things. And he said, all the time during the tropics, he thought of Goethe, and said, in the Amazon forests and on the peaks of the Andes, I had the feeling that the same life infiltrates stones, plants, and animals, as well as the swelling breast of humankind, as if animated by a single spirit from pole to pole. Everywhere I think of Goethe. Now, Goethe's approach to science was one that looked at the process of metamorphosis. Goethe had written in 1795 a work called The Metamorphoses of Plants, and this was the frontispiece of that book. It symbolizes the right of Orpheus, that is, the humanist, to unmask the secrets of botany, the secrets of nature. And in his, one of the secrets of the Goethe way of science was to look for the element, the fundamental element which could explain the whole. And the leaf, buttercup leaf, is the one that symbolizes that. The characteristics of Goethe's way were distancing from this great debate between encyclopédisme and Naturphilosophie, transcending the split of subject and object, an emphasis on metamorphosis as an essential quality of life, and that the world was the expression of a universal idea. This is a stark contrast to the Humboldtian science approach. When Humboldt wrote the first version of his Geography of Plants, Essai sur la géographie des plantes, he sent it to Goethe. And Goethe wrote back and said, thank you, I have read the volume several times, and I have tried to imagine a landscape myself, putting the heights of the European and American mountains sketched side by side. Snow lines and vegetation are also sketched. And I send you a copy of this sketch and ask you for your comments. Humboldt didn't reply, but it's very clear that this sketch by Goethe must have inspired his own way of depicting the geography of plants. Because in this map, the general global distribution of vegetation types, he accompanies it with altitudinally zoned depictions of vegetation. For example, on these simulated hills, Chimborazo, Cotopaxi, and some of the others, he sketched the distributions of different vegetation types by altitude. And in addition, the particular kinds of animals and ways of life that are characteristic of these. This is the zone between the equator and 10 degrees north and south. Here is a more temperate, the Tenerife model. Here then is the Himalaya, the Asian pattern, which is much more complex, much higher. And finally, the contrast of the New World and the Old, Alps and the Lapland. These invitations to reflection as well as analysis, he thought were the most evocative way of looking at the interactions of physical and human, and the need to look at things scientifically and also aesthetically. He did many other things while he was in the New World, among them looking at ways of life and the cultural diversity of the people of the Andes. And he had much to say about Eurocentrism and racial bias in the way the peoples of the world had been described. His theory was that the French Revolutionary theory that all people in the world had a right to be free and that their customs and belief systems deserved respect, and that that Europeans knew quite little about the wisdom of these civilizations. He climbed Chimborazo. He thought he had climbed the highest mountain in the world until somebody topped Mount Everest. But as this diagram shows, he actually was further away from the center of the earth than Everest. Mount Chimborazo was the mountain on which past President Bruno Messery and others planted a plaque celebrating the year of the mountain 2 or 3 years ago on Chimborazo. But it was this diagram, only faintly discernible here, that became the template of Humboldt's entire effort at showing the interactions of things. On this diagram and on the altitudinal belts at both sides, these are the kinds of things that are depicted. Vegetation, animal life, geological formations, cultivated crops, air temperature, perennials, snow line, chemical composition of the atmosphere, etc., etc. Many, many dimensions, and seeing how they were interacting with each other. And he said, this tableau summarizes all the research which I have conducted in the course of this excursion to the tropics. I dare to think that this will be of interest not only to the geographer. I believe that for all viewers, it will evoke a sense of multiple associations. In these immense chains of cause and effect, nothing can be regarded in isolation. The overall equilibrium which exists throughout major perturbations is the result of an infinite range of mechanical forces and chemical reactions, all of which balance each other. And here's the punchline, I think. While each series of facts needs to be studied separately in order to discover its own rules of order, the general study of nature demands that all knowledges about material transformations must be combined. And that was his life work, Cosmos, which took 30, 40 years. Humboldt has been applauded. His name has been put on garages and cafes, currents and oceans. He has been lauded as a political revolutionary in South America, comparable to Bolivar. He has inspired geologists such as Lyell and especially Agassiz. And his ideas are responsible for the final undermining of the Neptunist theory of rock formation and the overt acceptance of the more plutonic or volcanic-based theories of geology. Louis Agassiz said this was the most impressive moment of his life to meet van Humboldt. And then again, as my colleague Patrick Armstrong has written, the dragon tree that Humboldt described was what sent Charles Darwin on his voyage of the Beagle. Of Humboldtian science, the best example is this Physikalischer Atlas from the 1830s, as one of which I showed you. Humboldtian science, in contrast with Goethe's way, was very much tied into very accurate instruments and observations, new conceptual tools such as ISO lines and so on, moving beyond the lab out into the field, and a search for laws that eventually might cover the interrelationship of physical, biological, and human phenomena. Here's your map of disease, with South Africa the healthiest place. I would argue that the way he transcended these two contrasting ways of knowing was through his very clever deployment of landscape. Sending these sketches back to Europe at the time he did, he appealed to both the scientist, the natural scientist, and the humanist. The natural scientist found in these tropical landscapes, entirely new frontiers to conquer scientifically, but they also were exotic and they fired the imagination about other ways of life and culture. It was particularly an appeal to the aesthetic on which he depended, for the educational value of geography and plants particularly, biogeography. There are many quotations which I have cut on this, but he says that the contemplation of vegetation can be tremendously valuable for especially those in Europe that haven't traveled to the tropics. He appealed then to the landscape architect and to the landscape painter to see if through art a sense of the tropics could be communicated. And this is indeed what the paintings of Church have done. Church was inspired, as Edmunds Bunksha has written, he was inspired directly by the writings of Humboldt. And it was these landscapes of the Andes and the tropics, which inspired the first national park in Yosemite. How Humboldt has been received down the generations varies. Here's a recent satirical view that all he did was to collect data, but that is not at all the opinion, especially of the IGU, that put him on the cover of its bulletin in 1996. Let me try to bring this to a conclusion. I think that Humboldt's legacy is both scientific, philosophical, but mostly it is poetic. So I think it's the geopoetics of cosmos that could be of greatest interest to geographers today. He used landscape, both in its biophysical and human dimensions, as the catalyst for thinking geographically. Landscape wasn't just the surface of it involved cosmic dimensions. It embraced not only the geomorphology and geophysics of planet Earth, but the entire history of its human occupants, traceable especially, though not exclusively, on the geography of plants. The ingenuity, or the wits, as Franco Farinelli says, was its legitimacy as object of both natural science and humanities in the early 19th century. It was especially in the essay sur la géographie des plantes that Humboldt achieved the unique feat of integrating two otherwise contrasting approaches to the study of nature, Humboldtian science and Goethe's way. The major rhetorical achievement rested on not only demonstrated expertise in both science and humanities, but also on clever choices of discursive strategy. And I don't think I can get into the details of it, but I can just refer to 5. His emphasis on scale and the comparative method. His awareness of temporality, a vivid awareness that nothing was ever static on planet Earth, that all phenomena were in process of evolution, however diverse their temporal rhythms. Thirdly, his emphasis on sociality as a feature of all forms of life, not just humans, but especially plants. We spoke of the social plants and the individual plants. But especially he emphasized the need to not judge other cultures in the categories that one brings from one's home culture. As an enthusiast of French and American revolutions, he found slavery, of course, to be quite intolerable. Related to this, he was keenly aware of Eurocentric interpretations of peoples of the so-called New World. He offered many a precautionary note, like he said in quoting Spinoza, "Thus we see that all theories destined to explain natural phenomena are only modes of the imagination, not indicators of natural causes, but of the constitution of that imagination." And in a letter in 1796 already, he said, "Of the whole picture presented to us by physics, only the facts are stable and certain. The theories, children of our opinions, are variable like them. They are the meteors of the intellectual world, seldom beneficial and often harmful to the intellectual progress of mankind." The fourth one is his use of visual language in rendering landscape, to reveal not only the material, ecological, but also the aesthetic and ethical dimensions of humanity's relationship to the natural world. Landscape was an important tool to evoke understandings of regional character and people's sense of place, the challenge which he offered to the artists. So, to conclude, the legacy of Humboldt provides unquestionable rationale for examining again the possibilities of dialogue among specialists of geography's humanistic and scientific branches. Without such dialogue, how could geography really deliver the best that our discipline has always sought to provide by way of insight into sustainable ways of life? At the heart of our endeavors, there still beckons a central goal: to understand the humanized landscapes of planet Earth. This involves more than scientific mastery of the various geophysical and biological processes. It involves emotion, aesthetic, ethics, and a shared concern for wiser ways of dwelling, from local to global scales. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now invite Professor Eckhart Ehlers to come and give his address.